The following program may contain coarse language, violence, nudity, mature subject matter, or scenes which may not be suitable for all viewers. Viewer discretion is advised.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
And good evening, one and all, and welcome to the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell, and for the next 4 hours, I'm your host and your guide as together we'll cross this time-space continuum that I call the X Zone. It's a place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. It's a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Well, most of the time anyway. And we come to you Monday through Friday from 10 p.m. Eastern until 2 a.m. Eastern, right here on the Talkstar Radio Network, Mutual Broadcast Network, X Zone TV channel, X Zone Broadcast Network, and many other platforms around the world. If you'd like to send me an email, xzone@xzoneradiotv.com, on all social media sites, Xzone Radio TV. And these are very hard times for our good friends in Florida, now being battered by Hurricane Ian. So to all our listeners and our friends down in the Florida area, take care of each other, and we pray for your safety. X-Zone Nation, my first guest tonight is an old friend of the X-Zone. I sounded like Dean Martin there, didn't I, Craig? Yeah. Old friend of the X-Zone. Her name is GWILDA WIYAKA. And GWILDA is the hostess with the mostess of the very popular radio and TV show that we have on the X-Zone Broadcast Network and on Simul TV, Mission Evolution. And she is also the head honcho at findyourpathhome.com. So without further ado, let's bring her on. And hello, GWILDA. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Robert. How are you doing?
Did you just call me Robert?
I did.
That's a big no-no.
Ooh, so sorry.
It's okay, GWILDA Meyer. Good seeing you, my friend. Good seeing you. Just having a bit of fun. Congratulations on the great work that you're doing at Mission Evolution. I loved your conversation last night when I was listening to the playback with Dr. Brian Ullman. Fascinating, man.
Thank you. Yes, he's doing some beautiful work in the world, isn't he?
Yeah, he is. But imagine if this was a better world, nobody'd have stress and he'd be out of a job.
Yeah, that's true.
He was very interesting, man. Thoroughly enjoyed the great work that you did on that. So
thank you.
Kudos to you, my dear friend.
Thank you.
We're going to be talking about death, dying, and ghosts tonight. Now, let me ask you this. What does a shamanic practitioner like yourself, I mean, that's what your day job is when you're not hosting radio and TV shows for us, have to do with death, dying, and ghosts?
Well, shaman are energy masters. That's kind of a more modern way of putting it. But basically, they work in the, they're called shadow walkers by some traditions. They work in the betwixt and between physical matter and the energy level. And that's what happens when people get ready to die, is they leave the physical form and raise their frequency needs to raise up so that they can transcend to the unified field. And that's all of that is energy work. And so all traditions, shamanic traditions, and there's one behind every race we have some way of helping the dead to cross, of helping the people after the dead cross, of helping the, intervening when the dead haven't crossed and they're hanging around, and all that stuff. So all traditions have forms of that within them as part of the service. And like, say, for instance, the Lakota pipe carriers, it's their job to carry the soul of the dead for a full year and then return them to source. Now, that's an interesting concept, but it makes sense because that gives the mourners a full year, full season, all the holidays, all the, seasons to mourn. And then when they release the spirit, the person's name is never spoken again. And that's because
Really?
they're afraid it's going to call them back from the dead. Well, there's some real physiological reasons for this, or scientific reasons for this. It's like when you speak a person's name, it brings to your mind their frequency, and you resonate with that frequency, and then pretty soon you have kind of a manifestation of them. So it's very interesting the way the Lakota do that. And there, like I said, there's a tradition for that in every culture.
But isn't that hard on the people who have lost their loved one to have their memory around for a year? Doesn't that do some psychological damage when it comes to the grieving process? Like normally 3 days is long enough, and that is enough stress and trauma on a person. But to carry that out a year, isn't that carrying it on a little bit too much?
Well, it's not like they're doing a wake for a year, but rather what they're doing is the person's memory is still a part of the tribe. The name can be spoken. It was so nice to have so and so here last harvest, da 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 for the full year. And so they're kind of processing actually through each stage of a year without the person there, but still being able to speak of them and bring them to mind and all that stuff. But then after the year, there's a real solid closure whereby
Really?
their name isn't mentioned again. They might refer to them, she who was my daughter, that sort of thing. But the name and the traditions have changed. But this was the way my Lakota teacher taught me, and this was years ago. He died in his late 80s, early 90s, and I was in my 20s. So I'm sure the traditions have
Mhm.
changed somewhat. But that was the way he held to the old ways, and that's the way they did it.
So, how do different cultures deal with death and dying?
Well, and just again, shamanic cultures. I can only speak shamanically. I'm not a surgeon, and I'm not a scientist per se. But
Mhm.
shamanically speaking, the process of death isn't as simple as one might think. And every tradition has a way of getting a person prepared for death, like the Catholic tradition does the last rites.
Mhm.
The Tibetan tradition has kind of like a waiting room, if you will, where the person waits until they do the wake, and then everybody lights their pitcher on fire. They have a pitcher there, they light it on fire, and everybody stewards them, if you will, holds space for them to then go on to the next level. So, when a person is steeped in their own tradition, they have a method that they know to follow through while they're in their personal dying process. And it's a comfort. It's also a protocol, so they know what to do. We're getting away from a lot of that, and we're getting into one big modern mess out there as far as people that died, they left their body, but they didn't know what to do from there. And so, their energy still hanging around in this reality. And that's where we get some of our ghosts. There's lots of different kinds, but that's where we get some of them.
Okay, so how it seems that the traditions in different cultures have changed over the years. Some become more modernized than others. Others hold fast to their old ways. Um, how did this affect all these different cultures when we had COVID, for example, for 2 years? A lot of people could not grieve the death of a loved one. They weren't allowed, here in Canada, we couldn't go out, we couldn't cross the provincial borders, for example. So, how does this affect the dying process as well as the spirit journey from this side of the veil to the other?
Hugely. I've been called to be a death doula, and I can do it at a distance if someone knows to call me to do it at a distance, but I also sit with the dying. Well, you can't do that. You can't physically sit with the dying, and that's a heck of a lot more comfort than somebody saying, "Oh, well, your shaman's here in spirit." Well, that doesn't do them good. They need to be able to see you, feel you, know
Hmm.
you're there. Um, and as a result, we have a lot more people that are being clung to by the people that didn't get to sit with them when they died. They've got all this regret, and so they're kind of hanging on to their frequency, hanging on to their spirit. And so
Hmm.
there's more of the person here than there is on the other side for all practical purposes. Some were, left alone and regret they didn't get to say goodbye to their people, so they're kind of hanging around. It's a mess out there as a result of all that. It was not good.
So, how has this changed? Is it too late, 2 years later, to to make the change and to actually have the person go to the other side?
No, that's the beauty of shamanism is it's not bound by time or space. So shamanism can do work in the past, it can do work in the future, but it always does it from the
Mhm.
present. So in other words, I go into a trance in the present, and then I can be taken back to an event of the past that a person has disconnected from themselves there. We call that soul loss. It's a spiritual illness. Reconnect with that frequency, bring it forward to the present for the person, and it'll actually heal something that happened to them in the past. It'll heal them for the present and the future. So
Hmm.
shamanism, like I said, is not bound by time and space, which is very advantageous because I can go back to someone's deathbed before they left their body, and be there for them if I'm called to do so.
You said earlier that you sit with the dying. What do you do?
It's as different as every individual is, what their needs are. Some people, you just sit there and you're more there for the family than anything else. Some people, they don't know if they've lived a good enough life and they kind of believe in heaven and hell, even though they pretended they didn't. And they're afraid where they're going to
Mhm.
go. And so they're clinging to life, or even they cling to their body even after the body's quit, and they're having trouble getting across. And so because of that. And so my job is to set up a conversation with them, whether they're in their body or out of their body. I can set up a
Mhm.
spiritual conversation as well. And then I can journey to the crossover point. I can go there myself. I can lead them there. I don't cross over, but I can lead to the point. If I can get a person right at the edge of the crossover point, we can see all sorts of ancestors there. And then all of a sudden they go, "Oh, okay, I can go there. There's my mother." Okay, and they're comforted, and then then they'll tend to cross over. So it's very helpful to be able to walk them far enough up the frequency ladder that they can reconnect with the people on the other side, and then the job is done. Now I can do that verbally, talking somebody to somebody that's still alive and in their body, talk them into a journey trance and show them how to get there, or I can literally, not literally, but metaphorically take them there
Mhm.
in spirit once they've left their body but haven't gone across. And so that's what I do when I'm
Eh,
sitting there.
Very interesting. Gwilda Wiyaka is our special guest exonation. She is a practicing shaman, but she is also the host of Mission Evolution here on the Exxon Broadcast Network. If you'd like to find out more about Gwilda's show, visit www.missionevolution.org. And for all the programming on the Exxon Broadcast Network, visit www.xzbn.net. Gwilda and I will be back on the other side of this commercial break as the Exxon continues with yours truly, Rob McConnell, from our broadcast center and studios right here in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada. Don't go away. Welcome back, everyone. And Gwilda Wiyaka is our special guest. And welcome back, Gwilda.
Thank you.
When you were when we were talking in the first segment, you said that you sat with people as they were dying because they don't know if they're going to be going to heaven, if they're going to be going to hell, or where that positive place is in their religious philosophy, or where the negative place is in in their philosophy. Is there such a thing as hell?
Well, outside of the one we're living, um,
Hmm.
again, that's a question that each person has to answer for themselves. And of course, it's how do we define hell, that sort of thing. But in my way of thinking, hell is simply a very low frequency place. And when we
Hmm.
have compromised ourselves and our lives are so compromised that we're really, really, really low frequency, we can't access the unified field because it's high frequency, and we can't access each other, and we can't access spirituality, and we can't commune with nature that pretty much is hell to me. Okay. And I've seen a lot of people go there, a lot of people that are deep into depression or on drugs, or, the reasons are varied, but that's pretty much what you're looking at there for hell. Heaven to me is this frequency ladder that we climb. And what's interesting is now we're in a time when we can probably climb that ladder and get pretty doggone close without dying. But the frequency ladder, as you get higher and higher and higher frequency, there's less and less and less being and the other side, or the unified field. And that's, pure love. It's a resonance. It's exhilarating. And when you watch someone die and you see them finally get to the point where they're recognizing that place, it's really beautiful. It's not a painful thing for them. It's really lovely. So I think, again, like everything else, heaven and hell is a matter of frequency. The lower the frequency, the more disconnected, the more hellish it is.
Oh, okay. Help me understand this. If somebody is dying and they're in a coma, let's say, how will they know how to raise their frequency in order to make the transition from this side to the other?
Well, there's a process, and it's common to all death, okay? Whether we're doing it while we're alive and, evolving, or
Mhm.
whether we're doing it as we leave our body. But the process is going through the frequency ladder. And to incarnate into this physical form, we've had to leave part of our spirit behind because this physical form is a lower frequency. Now that the frequency is rising on the planet, more of us can become present. And that's a whole different discussion that we can have at another time. But when we go through life, we systematically disconnect from parts of ourselves and become very low frequency until there's a point where we can no longer, there's not a frequency to maintain physical life. So then you have to turn it around and walk back out as you're leaving your body to re-enter the unified field. And that's what the Catholics call purgatory, or
Mhm.
the Tibetans call moving through the bardo. Because what happens is you get a very often get a form of a life review, where each frequency where you disconnected from some part of yourself through trauma, you have that memory as you reconnect with that piece. And this is another thing that'll stop people trying to cross. They start having all these memories, and they're going, "Oh, it's my," you've heard the myth, "Oh, your life will
Sure.
pass before your eyes." Well, it does. It doesn't always, but it certainly does for a lot of people. And that is the walkout. You have to reclaim the frequency, move through that frequency, move through that trauma on your way out. And it can be a very traumatic experience. And that's why sitting with someone while they're moving through that and just reminding them, no, this is just a memory. Just breathe through it. You're going to get through. You're going to get through. It's just a memory. You don't have to be afraid. This isn't a sin. This is a disconnect.
It sounds as if the dying process is much more scientific than it is spiritual.
Well, it's really
Because
both,
well,
Rob.
wait
Yeah.
a sec, wait a
Mhm.
sec,
I'm sorry.
wait a sec. What I'm trying to get at, Wilda, is that we're talking about frequencies. We're talking about different dimensions. We're talking about basically quantum physics here. Is the time where we say goodbye to spirituality come and we just say, hey, listen, these are the facts. In the past, we believed what we believed. We know now how it really works. So let's say goodbye to the past, welcome the future, and from now on, this is the dying process. Do we really need religious and spiritual philosophies in order to cross?
Well, the religious and spiritual practices as we went through the long dark or the lower frequency times got fairly dogmatic. Okay.
Mhm.
And that's why they all had it's this way, no, it's this way, no, it's this way, no, it's this way. And I've spent
Right.
a lifetime studying this stuff and realized, no, they all are saying a different form of the same thing. And if they aren't aligning with each other, that's where they've got the dogma. So I just really listen to where they're all in agreement. Now, we don't have to, science is trying to explain life. Spirituality is trying to do the same thing. I truly
But
believe that the two come together, and where that happens, then truth can be known. I really feel that we're not making spirituality obsolete, but we are
mhm.
certainly getting ready to filter out the dogma. So if you bring in scientific fact and you use it to filter out the dogma, then spirituality will hold water. I truly believe it because I've seen it work.
We know for a fact that spirituality is losing ground with religious philosophies. People are fed up of it. They know it's more smoke and mirrors and a manner in which to control the population of that religious sect.
Right.
So here we are in the year 2022. Do we really need the smoke and mirrors? Do we need the spirituality when somebody passes? Or should it just be, okay, her life came to an end. She'll be missed. Goodbye.
Well, for me, we're kind of mixing up spirituality versus religion, and the dogmatic religion, um,
Mhm.
to me, is doing more harm than good at this point because it's really limiting a person's understanding, and we're evolving into fairly intelligent human beings. We shouldn't have to check our brain at the door of the church to understand what's being taught, and there's a lot of that still goes on. On the
So
other
what is the
hand,
difference what is the difference between spirituality and religion then?
okay. Religion is a somewhat dogmatic practice that I think was created by men, men
Mhm.
or women, and this telling you what God meant when He said. Okay,
Right,
and
okay.
spirituality is a connection to a higher source. To whether it's a
Okay.
higher source of yourself or a higher source of all that is, or the unified field. It doesn't have to have a dogmatic set of principles rather than a personal connection with source. So that's
All
that's
right.
the difference for me.
Having said that, I can't see a difference. Like I'm listening to you and you're talking about spirituality and in Christianity, there is the Holy Spirit. There's spirituality there. So if we're saying that established religions like Christianity are kind of a control factor, a way to explain the old ways when we did not have the scientific knowledge that we have today, is what it is all about. You know, the Ten Commandments, they're great rules to live by, but uh, were they really passed down by a deity? And so if we start stripping the spirituality away from Christianity, we're looking at the same thing when we talk about spirituality. They're one and the same. So if we don't need one, why do we need the other?
Um, I want to be clear. I am Christian. Okay, I'm
Okay.
not. I don't go to a Christian church, and I'm not
Hmm.
particularly dogmatic about it. But
Yeah.
whether Christ was a real human being or a metaphor, I'm very moved by his life and his example and the teachings. Okay.
Right.
With that said, I think that we have to understand that we've taken the teachings and we've frozen them to mean a certain thing. When
Hmm.
indeed, it's like when you're going to tell your children about the birds and the bees, you tell them in a different way when they're 4 than when they're 14, right?
Well, I don't know any child of 4 years old who's ever asked about the birds and the bees, Golda, to be honest with you.
Oh, I always get the "where did I come from" question. That's what I mean.
No, the
Okay.
stork, everybody knows that.
Okay. Maybe that was a bad
Or
example for
under a
you.
cabbage leaf.
Under cabbage leaf. But anyway, what I was trying to say is that
Hmm.
the way it was understood when we were less evolved, less
Right.
progressive, was true to a point. But now we're opening up higher levels of truth. And we need to look back and say, well, this was true, but I was viewing it a little askew. With this new information, oh, if I shift my perspective just slightly, then it all lines up. When it lines up, that's kind of like a moment of truth. And I think you find that in science, and I think you find that in spirituality, and I think you find it in religion.
My personal belief, I think the time has come to say goodbye to spirituality and religion. It's time to look at the human factor. And I think that once we get the playing field leveled and we push aside the spiritual beliefs and the religious beliefs, except Christmas, of course, it'll be a better place. It really will. You won't have religious wars. You won't have tension between different cultures. It's leveling the playing field. But that's just my opinion. Let me ask you something. You say that our body does not die at the same time. What do you mean by that?
Well, this takes us into science and physics. Only about 10% of the human body is actually human cells. The rest is flora and fauna and symbiotic creatures that live with us that we have to have present for life.
Mhm.
And when the human being dies, or when the heart stops beating, when the spirit leaves the body, all these little critters are still alive in there. Okay. And they all die kind of at their own pace. And some of them hang around to clean up the mess and deteriorate the body. So there are some religions like the Tibetans that they sit with the dead, and the Celtics did as well. Literally sit with the dead for a certain number of days, giving the rest of the body time to um, give up the ghost, if you will. And if you think about it, if only 10% of us human cells, the way we express when we're alive is a conglomeration rather than just an individual spirit. And so there's a lot of intelligence to that, that part of what made that human who they were is still in the death process. And so they're sitting with them.
But what is the sense of sitting with somebody after they're dead?
Well,
I have a problem trying to understand that. I understand the grieving process,
mhm.
and in my opinion, by hanging around and having a cadaver that has no substance in it, you're grieving. The cadaver is there. All you're doing is prolonging the grieving process. No offense to anybody who's listening who doesn't agree, but when the body is dead, same day, goodbye.
Well, when is the body dead? That's the whole point. And I'm not arguing for or
Mhm.
against the tradition. I'm just saying this is the traditions and this is why. That the body doesn't
But a
die all at
tradition is
once.
something a tradition is something from the past that you bring into the present and you want to keep going into the future. It doesn't mean it's logical, it doesn't mean it makes sense, and it doesn't mean that it's necessary.
I won't argue that. But I do find that if you look at traditions, there's usually a reason behind them. Once you recognize the reason behind them, you can find a more
Mhm.
expedient way of fulfilling that need. And I personally would just as soon not sit 3 days with a cadaver to do
Yeah,
it. I mean,
exactly.
I'm with you. But it's just, it helps to understand why these traditions are in place, what's really going on, and how to honor that. I mean, you can simply say, I honor all that you were
Mm.
and say goodbye and
Or
walk
you
away,
can
you know?
or you can do like the Irish do. They celebrate the life of the person. They don't grieve the death. They you have fun. The old joke, what's the difference between an Irish wedding and an Irish wake? One less drunk. It makes
Exactly.
a lot of
Yeah,
sense.
it does. And they actually have call what the Celtic tradition they call three pipers. And the first piper sings the song of sorrow, and that's the mourning process. The second piper plays the song of joy, absolute joy. That's the
Mhm.
wake part. But then the process isn't done until the lullaby. And the lullaby is when everything balances back out, neither over joy nor over sorrow. And that's
Wow, that's
isn't that a beautiful tradition?
it's different from the Irish wakes I've been at, I'll tell you.
Well,
Totally
they kind of
different.
get stuck in the joy part.
Hmm. Yeah.
And the
All right, stand
bottle.
by, Wilda. You and I have to take a commercial break. We'll be back on the other side as the X Zone continues with yours truly, Rob McConnell, from our broadcast center and studios in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada. Don't go away. Hey, welcome back, everyone. This is the X Zone. GWILDA WIYAKA is our special guest, www.missionevolution.org and www.findyourpathhome.com. Gwilda, what is psychopumping? Or psychopumping, I should say.
Yeah, very, very, very well
One letter.
pronounced. Little bit of Latin there. Psychopumping is what we were talking about earlier, and that's the process of helping the dead to cross. And so that's it's a shamanic skill, but other
Mhm.
people do it as well. Some people that do house clearings, and they say, well, they help the dead to cross, or they call the angels in to
Yeah.
help the dead to cross, that sort of thing. But that's what it is. It's the act of helping the dead to cross, and it can be done in numerous ways, but mostly involves setting up a dialogue with the person that is either dead or in the process of dying and talking them into just let's explore. Let's go over here and take a look. If you don't like it, I'll bring you back. And like I said, once they get to the higher frequency where they can really see the unified field, and it usually will show itself to them in the form of their ancestors, then they're good to go. They're happy to cross.
Well, what is the crossing point then? Is there a point of no return when they start that voyage? Once they get past that certain point, they can't come back?
No, that's not the case, which is very interesting. The crossover point is kind of this. It's not a definite point, but it's a bandwidth of frequency. After when you move through it, you do what the Native
Hmm.
Americans call dropping your robes. In other words, all the things that were your
Oh, oh, oh,
patterns.
oh, oh, whoops! Dropping your robes?
Now, don't you play the stripper? No,
Well,
they
it sounds like something you do in a Turkish bath. I wouldn't
yeah,
say,
exactly. Dropping your rows. That's just a term they
Okay.
use. But basically, what you're doing is you're shedding
Hmm.
the distorted parts of yourself. So your patterns, your woundedness, your negative beliefs, all those things. When you reach a particular frequency, there's no space for them. So if you're going to hold on to those, then you go backwards and you stay in this reality, or you just go ahead and let them go and you cross to the other side. However, once you've crossed to the other side, you can come back anytime you choose as a helping spirit, but you don't carry the distortions and the agendas that you did before you did the crossover.
You say you don't have to be dead to have a ghost. Can you be a ghost and still be alive?
Yes, you can. Well, we are ghosts, right? There's so much of us
I don't know
outside of
about
our
that.
there's so much of us outside of our body functioning outside of our conscious control. But I'll give an example of soul loss that
Mhm.
led to a person that I thought was dead not being dead. I was teaching a workshop in a off-grid Y2K fortress on the border of Canada and Washington, and it was clear out in the country. And it had belonged to this Amish couple, and they had changed the people that bought it had changed the Amish couple's home into a residence for people that came to do the workshop. And some of my students started reporting to me, Gwilda, there's a woman out there hanging clothes on the line, but I can see through her. So I had some gifted people, and I'm going, well, we have a problem. So finally I said, okay, fine. I, set up this dialogue with the woman. Now I wasn't physically seeing her, but that's not tend to be the way I register things, but I could feel something going on. And so I set up this dialogue and I said, you're not here anymore. Your family's not here anymore. Would you like to go back to your family? Yes, she wanted to go. So metaphorically, I put her on my horse and I'm heading for the crossover point. And we get a little ways out over the terrain and she'd start diving off the horse and I couldn't figure out what was going on. Well, finally I just let her go and I'm going, I don't know what's going on. Well, I found out later that the woman wasn't dead, that she was living some miles down in an Amish community. But she had loved that farm so much that she left part of herself there. She was still so attached to the land and so attached to the place that a huge part of herself, a huge chunk of herself was there. And I had the good fortune of being able to meet her and visit with her. And I asked her, I said, you used to live there? And she said, yes, I did. Wish I still did. She said, in fact, just until recently, I would rather just go back there and be alone than not be there at all. But least recently, I feel better about it. And, I met her, what was a month after that workshop. So it was pretty fascinating. And that's just one example of many that I've had where a person can leave themselves behind. Sometimes it's not a trauma, sometimes it's a place they loved. Okay. And then they never quite get over it because they've left part of themselves there. And sometimes people that do a paranormal investigation are actually picking up people that are big chunks of people that are actually still alive. They aren't really dead ghosts, they're living ghosts. So there's more to the ghost than meets the eye.
How many different types of hauntings are there?
Boy, there's more than you can shake a stick at. So that was a haunting, and yet the woman was alive. So that was
Right.
a haunting. Other times, people die; they don't know they're dead, and they're wandering around their house, wondering why there's different people living there, and they get mad. And those are when you start having the manifestations that they call in the Ghostbusters for. There's other hauntings. These are really interesting, and that's where a person was very obsessive and did something the same way every time and then they leave a trail. It's not really their spirit there, but it's rather a trail. So where I could interact with that lady that was hanging the laundry, or I could interact with a person that's still in their home and they're really angry because nobody's paying any attention to them and somebody else has moved in, I can communicate with those spirits. But the ones that are a trail, I cannot. They just plod along through their routine. They do what they do. And so there was like the lady in black. She was a lady that on a particular day would go mourn at a graveyard. You could walk right up to her, you could run your hands through her, this or that. It never interrupted what she was doing, and she never interfaced with people. So this is a trail that's left by our frequency, by our energy, but we're not really part of it. It's just an energetic trail that's left that repeats. That's another kind of a haunting. Then we have poltergeists. Those are particularly interesting. And did you know that poltergeists most often occur in a household with teenage children that are
Yep.
just prepubescent? And
Hmm.
so there's a lot of evidence, shamanic evidence, if you will, that it's actually the spirit of the child playing mischief, because they're feeling stifled, they're feeling having to grow up, they're, all those things that you go through at the teens and all these wild hormones, and they're part of them is outside of their body raising mischief and moving things around, and so there's all sorts of different kinds of hauntings. Then there's ones where it's a couple, two or three people haunting at the same time. Maybe it was a catastrophe where the house burned down and several people died at once and in their sleep or whatever, and they don't know they're dead, and so you have more than one, and that's kind of hard to sort out too.
When we come back from this final break, I'm going to ask you this question. So I'll give it to you now so you can have time to ponder it. Why do you want to work with people who are dying, and why do you want to be involved with the dead? That's my question to you, GWILDA WIYAKA. We'll be back on the other side of this break as we wrap up this hour here in the X Zone with yours truly, Rob McConnell. My guest this hour is GWILDA WIYAKA. And for more information about Gwilda and her radio show here on the X Zone Broadcast Network, Mission Evolution, visit www.missionevolution.org. And for classes, books, and so much more that Gwilda has been doing and continues to do, visit www.findyourpathhome.com. This is the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell. We'll be back after this final break. Don't go away. And welcome back. We are here with GWILDA WIYAKA this hour. First of all, Gwilda, thanks very much for joining us this hour. Interesting concepts that you've brought up. And it's funny to see the difference between the shamanic way of looking at the dead, the death and dying process, compared to what modern day paranormal investigators claim happens at the crossing point. And before we went to the break, I asked you the question about why you want to be involved with the dead and the dying.
Well, that's a great question, Rob. And of course, that's not the largest portion of my practice by any means. It's not like
Right.
that's all that I do. But when I was in my early 20s, I had a gymnastics accident and I crushed a disc in my spine so badly that they had to take it out and do a spinal fusion. And I'm real sensitive to drugs, and it was an 8-hour surgery. And towards the end of the surgery, my heart stopped. And I had one of those good old near death experiences. And I was looking back down at my body. And just like you hear so many people say,
Mhm.
I could see them trying to resuscitate me. I could see them bringing the pads out. I could see my surgeon freaking out. He never was a freaky kind of person, but he was not a happy man at that moment. And then I saw that light, that you want to go to, you want to go really bad. And then, but I was torn between my doctor that was wanting me to stay and my family that I wanted to be with. And I was a young woman, but that light was so appealing and I really wanted to go. And I just headed that direction. And of course, I got sent back. Here I am. But that changed everything for me in that I knew that I was dead and I knew I was out of my body and I knew that there was someplace I really wanted to go but couldn't yet. and that the frustration of not being able to go there sticks with me still. And at the same time, that I'd been totally in sciences up until that point. I had worked on my degree in psychology. Everything was, the scientific methods, studies, statistics, that sort of thing. And after that experience, that's what I opened up to. There is more to life here. And I didn't give up on the science, obviously. I'm still fascinated by it. But then I started researching death. And in the process, of course, through various means, I ended up in shamanism. And when I started seeing, oh, I can go there, or at least part of the way there, in journey space. I can go there in my day-to-day life. I can bring that frequency into my life now. And then I got to thinking about all the poor people that can't find their way, that feel that frustration, that feel the terror, that are staying right there, frozen between the body that's gone and the light that they can't reach. And I just got very, very motivated to help those people. Plus, it's becoming very clear with all the deaths going on and all the confusion about what death is and what's going to happen. There's a lot of people that are still around that are suffering because they're afraid to cross or they don't know how to cross. And it's a work of love. It really is.
So how do you get a person to cross if they don't want to cross?
Well, if they flat don't want to cross, okay, as long as they're not causing mischief or giving somebody else grief, that's their choice. But
Mhm.
if they are, like when you're getting into, okay, we gotta clear this house, right? Because somebody else owns it and everybody's suffering. Um, and then what I do is I tell the person, well, if you don't want to cross, that's really your business, but you can't be bothering these people here. And so then I have to educate the people on how they need to keep their environment and themselves at a higher frequency so that they're simply not tuned in to the channel where the ghost is. And that's pretty easily done once you know what you're doing. But sometimes it takes some personal work because our frequency is low because we have some personal issues.
Where do you see the death, dying, and ghost spirituality or beliefs going as we get further away from the legends that have been told? Will this become a modern society where a person dies, it's just a death, let's get on with the grieving process and get on with our lives?
I see it as a time when we are able to look at the old ways, understand what they were really trying to achieve, okay,
Mhm.
what the real purpose was behind them rather than all the dogma that's gotten packed on over the years, and meet those needs for people, everybody according to their needs, but having some provision there for people that need that kind of support. On the other hand, I'm going to take it a step further. I really believe that as we evolve, there's not going to be any real major difference between life and death. Um, it's like I lose a pet or I lose a dear one. And yet,
Mhm.
because I can do the shamanic journey, I can go visit them anytime I want to. Now, I'm probably just revisiting their frequency in my personal field, but it's a comfort to
Right.
me. It's a comfort to me. And I think there'll come a time when we don't see that separation as such a horrible thing. And that to me is a goal worth reaching.
Don't take this wrong, but is that shamanic journey reality, or is the shamanic journey just in your mind?
Yes.
Yes, what?
The shamanic journey, what it is, it's basically you use a ritual to alter your brain waves so that you can access the dream state. And in the dream state, you can receive metaphors that tell you what's going on at the frequency level. So the shamanic journey trance, the things that are going on are indeed being made up by my mind or by my imagination, actually, not my mind so much. Then those metaphors are taken to the mind and the mind translates them to make sense of what the message is.
Sounds
So
like a dream.
it is a dream, but then
Mhm.
so's this. So's
I, d-
this.
I don't agree with you on that. I believe in reality because in a dream, I don't have to pay my taxes. Here in reality, I do.
Yeah, that's the nightmare portion, isn't it?
Gwilda, let our listeners know how they can find out more about you. Tell us about your show and where they can buy your books and your CDs.
Okay, I'll do that. You can find out everything I do on findyourpathhome.com. or you can find my radio show, Mission Evolution, on missionevolution.org. My books are available at findyourpathhome.com or at amazon.com. A lot of workbooks, a book, So We're Still Here Now What? Spiritual Evolution and Personal Empowerment, A New Era. It's all about this kind of stuff. I'm also about to hold a class, actually, for Samhain, depending on how you want to say it. It's spelled Samhain.
Halloween.
It's pronounced Samhain, yeah, for Halloween. About doing Fomorian work, and I'm going to get that on my website here pretty soon. So that's going to be coming up on the 30th of next month. And classes are available on that website too, the findyourpathhome.com.
All right, Gwilda, time has come when I must say so long to you, my good friend. I'll be speaking to you over the week, and I'll look forward to working with you on your next edition of Mission Evolution. Until then, thank you so much for all you do.
Thank you, Rob. Been a real pleasure.
Take care, little one. Exonation, Gwilda WIYAKA has been my guest this hour. www.findyourpathhome.com and www.missionevolution.org. I'll be back at the top of the hour as the X Zone continues right here from our broadcast center and studio in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada. I'm Rob McConnell, and if you would like to send us an email, xzone@xzoneradiotv.com. We'll be back. Don't go away.